order to build a positive sum environment, someone, if not everyone, has to give something away. So for nouns, right, they're giving away rights, CC0. Shout out to the name of this podcast, right? You have to give a lot away. In the Clanker's case, like in order to build a positive sum environment for creators on Clanker, you have to give away fees, right? And some people aren't willing to do that, right? But
pump that fun.
I'm not naming name. It's Pump. And, the reality is like, you can't simultaneously say, I want a positive sum environment and I'm not going to give anything away. That's just not how the world works. Yeah, I'm thankful and grateful that that's kind of the culture that is being built within the Clanker ecosystem, within the base ecosystem, et cetera. And I certainly plan on continuing that, with Native, like I mentioned.
Yo, grab your headphones, get ready to vibe. ZEROPOD is coming at you when we're doing it live. ZEROPOD, yo, I said ZEROPOD, yo, ZEROPOD.
GM, and welcome to another episode of ZEROPOD, the zero copyright video podcast for people who enjoy Ethereum. I'm your host, Toady Hawk, and this week my guest is Mr. Derek Brown, the mad scientist, developer, and founder behind the upcoming agentic on-chain game called Native.fun, built on top of the Clanker protocol on Base. I had a blast getting to know Derek and hearing his story from working as a rural Midwest minister to coding in the halls of some of the biggest tech companies in Silicon Valley, and then striking out to build tech startups of his own. His vision for Native is really ambitious, and I can't wait for you to learn all about it. So without further ado, let go.
That's kind of my icebreaker fun fact is, I have 3 daughters, all with the same birthday. They're not triplets. And that usually throws
it's like a riddle.
Yeah. They're all girls. They all share the same birthday, which is cool. That's kind of where the name for Birthday Labs comes from.
Is it too invasive to ask if it was on purpose? Like, did you schedule the second one for the same day, or?
I get lucky once a year. So I'm kidding. No, it was, so the older 2 were twins. And they were born obviously, on the same day, 15 minutes apart. And then the youngest was her due date. When actually at the first OB scan, her due date was their birthday, and we're like, "Oh, that's a fun fact. Like, we'll have to remember that. There's no chance she's going to be born on her due date." Sure enough, she came at noon on her due date on their birthday. So
that's so crazy. Our second was born on Labor Day, which we thought was funny when they gave us the day of Labor Day. We're like, well, wouldn't that be funny if you went into labor on Labor Day? And sure enough, that's how it happened.
Yeah, that's cool.
First of all, I just want to thank you for taking the time to sit down with me. We've been interviewing a lot of folks building in the Farcaster ecosystem, so it seemed like time to sit down with Derek and find out what you're building, what Native's all about. I know people have been asking a lot about it. So appreciate your time. If you don't mind sharing, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you. Like, where did you grow up? What was young Derek like? And let's find out a bit about you before we talk about what you're building.
Yeah. So I think, my background, I was born in New York. I've lived maybe 13, 14, 15. I've literally lost count at this point. Different states. Growing up, my dad worked for Dupont, and he was basically the fixer, right? So, did a lot of safety engineering and things like that. And so we moved around a lot as his career progressed, which meant that...
It was like you were in the armed forces of Dupont?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, when I tell people that, that's like the first thing that they think about. It's like, oh, you were an Army brat growing up. It's like, no, it was a Dupont brat growing up. But I didn't know any better, right? It was, you're dropped into a new school system every couple of years, which is about what it was. I had 3 different high schools, 3 first grade classes, 2 second grade classes, the whole 9 yards. And, just kind of growing up like that, you just don't know any better, right? And so you're dropped into a new school system. You have to, make friends quickly, or you're a loner. Like, that's basically the choice. I think naturally I'm an introvert. I can come across as an extrovert, because of that kind of childhood, I think. That said, I had a great childhood, very close knit, kind of traditional family. Mom, dad, two younger siblings. I'm the firstborn. Um,
Same
and
here.
because of my
Firstborn
dad's job,
power.
yeah, exactly. Not only, because of my dad's job, not only did I kind of move around a lot and see a lot of the country, but I was also exposed to technology pretty early. So my dad was, one of the first people I knew to have a laptop, and we had like, the gateway computers when they would come in the cow boxes, et cetera. And so, pretty early to a lot of tech, and obviously for my career. One of the kind of most seminal moments that I clearly, distinctly remember is I was digging around in Windows 95, and I found System 32, this mysterious folder in C Windows. And in System 32, there was this application. It was a .exe file, obviously, as they are, and it was called QBasic.exe. And I was like, "Oh, what is that?" Right, and I double clicked and I saw this giant blue screen show up on the computer, and I started digging around and like reading docs and things like that, and come to find out, I, as little Derek, could actually tell this computer what to do and it would listen. And that was like game breaking for me. It was really cool to think about that. And so I started building some like basic programs, but that was my first programming language was
No
Quick
pun
Basic.
intended.
Yeah, and fell in love very quickly with programming, mainly as a hobby. Never thought of it as a career, to be honest.
Oh, guys, that is interesting. You know what else is? Meme coins. I hear even the president has one these days. But how do you make one? Let me tell you about Clanker, the AI agent that wants to turn your dreams into memes. Tag it on the Farcaster network with a token name, a taker, and a thumbnail, and within seconds, you'll have a meme coin deployed on the base network. I even clanked my mustache. So what will you clank up next? Check out more at Clanker.world, or if you're not on Farcaster, Clank.fun. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Have AI that can help people that aren't technical write code. Like, it's not the software engineers that are going to rule the roost in another 5 to 10 years. It's the people who are technically proficient in the same way that you should be mathematically proficient or literate, right? Or writing proficient. You should be code proficient, but it's the people that can actually use code to execute like good ideas and to actually make change in the world. And if all you know academically is programming languages, I don't think you're prepared very well for the next decade of technology. I think the people that are creative and culturally aligned and aware of large systems like politics and economics and religion and things like that, those are the people that are going to be able to use the tools of code and programming languages to actually impact the world in a positive way. Yeah, I mean, and I also understand that I'm probably an outlier there, especially over the last 10 years. I think that worldview is becoming a little bit more popular, which I'm grateful for. But over the last, let's call it 20 years, prior to my career, maybe even longer at this point, I'm getting old. I always looked at coding as kind of a side thing. It was a hobby, similar to Magic the Gathering or something along those lines, right? It was just something fun to do to pass the time. And, I learned a variety of different programming languages growing up. I would, go to Barnes and Noble when that was a thing and buy these like $70 thick books when that was a thing. And like, learn from a CD when that was a thing back in the the back of the book, right? And so I learned a variety of programming languages that way. But I was always fascinated by the government and politics and international relations, foreign affairs, things like that. And that's actually what I studied in school. I knew for certain that I wanted to be in the intelligence world, not as like James Bond, a spy or anything, but just like read today's newspaper and figure out what's going to happen tomorrow. Is the easiest way to explain it. just fascinated by geopolitics and that type of thing. And so that's what I studied in school.
What was your major?
I was a dual major, religious studies and philosophy, and political science with a concentration in security studies, which is the intelligence world, right? And that's what I wanted to do with my career, to be honest. I wanted to go into government, wanted to pursue that kind of path. Saw my future living in Washington D.C. and things like that. And then a couple of things kind of happened in my life, both professionally and personally. On the personal side, I became a devout Christian, went into ministry for quite some time, but was bivocational, so I was doing ministry full time as well as working, and started the family. And so at that time, I wasn't just bivocational; I was I don't know, quadrivocational, working multiple jobs to make ends meet while doing full-time ministry, living in a single wide trailer in rural North Carolina, making 26K for a family of four. And that was a tough time. This was the middle of the financial crisis. So 2007, 2008. And um, it was tough, but it was life. You just did it. And so I applied. I needed a big boy job for my now growing family, and like we were talking before the episode, my oldest two kids are twins, and so I have no idea what it's like to have one kid, and so immediately had two,
It's crazy.
and yeah, and
I know
needed
how
to pay
much
the
I know
bills.
what it was like going from. I know what it was like going from one kid to two, so I can't imagine going straight to two. It's nuts.
Well, I mean, like I said, I don't know any better, right? Yeah, it's just like, here's two kids, take care of them. And so that's what I tried to do. And I applied to a local job in Eastern North Carolina, which is where I was living at the time. It's also where I went to school. Um, and applied to a job on Craigslist, of all places. When that was
Which
a
was
thing.
also a thing. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And basically this was a local IT network shop. They literally would put in Ethernet jacks into office buildings. um, and it was called Data Group. Shout out to Joe Thigpen if you're watching this by chance. Still love and respect you, man. And he took a chance on me as a web dev with no professional background. And that was kind of my first toes into technology as a career. Fast forward a couple of years from there, I had worked at a place called Gander Mountain, which is like REI, Bass Pro Shops, leading their kind of commerce front end type stuff. And then LinkedIn called. LinkedIn was basically the first job in Silicon Valley that I had, and where my kind of career as it's shaped out to be really
So
started.
did you guys moved to Silicon
We
Valley at
did,
that point?
yeah.
Your family? Wow.
Yep. So, my family and I were in East North Carolina. Simultaneously, I had job offers from Booking.com, which was based in Amsterdam, and LinkedIn, which was in Silicon Valley and Mountain View at the time. They're now in Sunnyvale, but um, and it was just like one of these fork in the road type moments where it's like, do we go to Europe, or do we stay here, or do we go to California? And my wife, she's like, California seems closer. Let's try that. And she had flown out for the interview along with my youngest, who was still in diapers at the time, and seen California. It was our first time to California, etc. I had never lived there, even despite kind of moving around, in my childhood, and so we liked what we saw. LinkedIn was a fantastic place to work. I'm still, this might be one of the things that a lot of people disagree with me on, but I'm still extraordinarily bullish LinkedIn. I love the network that they've built and the platform that they're building, despite the kind of crap they get from a lot of people. And that's kind of started my career in tech. And basically made a career out of leading teams, high efficiency, productivity teams, building culture around those teams, etc. That's part of my natural gifting, I guess. And you basically built a career out of that. So left LinkedIn for Adapar, which was a Series B startup at the time in the wealth management space. I became VP of product development while there. Basically meant that I led all of product management, design, QA, and about half of the engineering org. Reported directly to the CEO while I was there. Left Adapar for the startup world, and basically gone smaller and smaller ever since joining LinkedIn. Right, so it went from LinkedIn, which was this massive, thousands of people, publicly traded company, to a growth stage startup at Adapar, to a series of startups, and now somehow I've gone even smaller, and it's just me working on.
Many such cases I find. Like, I'm an entrepreneur as well, and I've experimented with having bigger businesses. At one point, I had about 20 employees working for me, and it's like I think back to those days and like so much stress for so little marginal benefit. And I think over time as an entrepreneur, you kind of realize that like the one thing you can bet on is yourself, and like scaling is really difficult. And some people do it really well, but sometimes you could just do so much, make so much more impact just knowing, what your skills are and marketing those properly.
Yeah, I think that's a large part of it for me. I mean, my last year, frankly, was really tough across a number of facets. Two of my daughters faced death,
Wow.
so yeah, it was a tough time for a couple of different reasons. And then
I'm sorry.
professionally, we made the decision to wind down Bunches, which was a company that I've been working on for 4 to 5 years. Despite having like significant traction on the product side, it was just too
Yeah.
difficult to monetize, and so we decided to wind that down. And so, it was a tough year from the outside looking in,
Yeah.
and it was just like I need a break, and like I said, building is a break for me. It's a hobby. It's cathartic, and so started building and out popped Native, and so now the rest is history. Well, the future is history.
I
The
hope,
rest of the future, I guess.
yeah. I hope your daughters are doing better now.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Don't
yeah.
mind
They
to
they
ask. I
are.
hope.
Yeah, one was like a super rare genetic thing involving the heart, and it was just like
Oh,
dealing with both daughters back to back in the first 3 months of 2024, combined with we were having to
yeah.
fundraise at the time for Bunches was venture backed. We had raised well over $5-6 million, and having to do an extension at that time, and it was tough, but they're doing great now, thriving.
Awesome. So you've brought us up to present and into the future with Native. But before we sort of jump in to talk about what Native is, I'd like to just maybe double click on the, what were the pre-existing, platforms that allowed something like Native to even exist in the first place. And those would be maybe in kind Base, Farcaster, and Clanker. So first, let's talk about like how did you get into crypto in the first place? How did you end up building on Base? But first of all, how did you get into crypto?
Yeah, so I bought my first Bitcoin at $300. This was 2013, maybe 2014. I'd have to go back and look. But I was at LinkedIn, and I distinctly remember Wayne, one of the engineering managers that I work with at LinkedIn. He's like, "Hey, take a look at this," and he sent me a link to this new startup in town and this Whitepaper thing. It's the first time I had ever heard Whitepaper used outside of political science, or like scientific study or whatever. I was like, "What is this?" And it was Satoshi's Bitcoin paper. Um, Read through it, and I had actually been primed for it with something in my childhood, which I'll talk about in a moment. But and the startup was this little startup that could Coinbase, and it was kind of the talk of the town at the time. I think they had just raised a round or something, and people were talking about it. It's like, what is this like internet money thing? And so bought my first Bitcoin, sold it for Tesla stock, sold Tesla stock, and wasted the money or something.
Generational
Traveled
wealth, hate it
probably.
again.
Yeah, exactly. Traveled probably. But that was my exposure to crypto. Um, I haven't found anybody that remembers this company, but there was a company when I was middle school, high school called eBeans. And it was basically like currency online that you could use within their network. And you earned it by participating in their network, watching ads, that type of thing. And you would earn beans, and then you would go spend beans elsewhere. They shut down because of the double spending problem. So people would accumulate beans and then spend them multiple places before it had a chance to catch up.
They anticipated the problems that Satoshi would later solve then.
Exactly. So I'm reading this white paper. I'm like, holy cow, he solved it, right?
He solved beans.
He solved
He
beans.
solved beans.
Um, and so, I bought Bitcoin, and I've paid attention ever since. Fast forward, really went off my radar for a couple of years, like 2015 into 2016. I would own some Bitcoin and kind of trade it basically as an asset. But crypto as an industry wasn't really on my radar until 2017. CryptoKitties, obviously the ICO craze subsequent to that, and then Ethereum. Figuring out that you could actually write programs. Again, comes back to code as hobby for me. I was like, okay, like what's this cool thing? The Solidity? Yeah, I'll figure that out over a couple of weekends. And got involved, wrote some smart contracts, worked with some people on the ICO type stuff as a side project. I was at a startup at the time in the consumer finance space, and just ever since 2017, I would consider my like the start of me being super interested in crypto and kind of following it, even though I wasn't doing it professionally. Prior to then, it was just like an economic, financial type thing for me. And so paid attention, obviously was primed for 2021 and 2020 and 2021 with the NFT craze. And
What was your first NFT? Do you remember?
my first NFT, I don't remember.
What's
I'd
your
have
most
to go back
memorable
and look.
NFT then from 2021?
I really loved and still love the Animatus project. They were one of the first kind of cohesive worlds building with NFTs. I thought the art was super cool. I thought the tech was cool. They did some pretty interesting stuff before a lot of others. The community was
What was
great.
Animeta's? I remember Animeta's, but I can't remember exactly what they looked like. I'm trying to remember.
They were like It was like a pixel art, and they had different archetypes. Obviously robots, but prisoners and
Oh right, yes,
things like that. Yeah, it was just a lot of fun, and the community was
kind of like a cyberpunk kind of vibe.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. It was very pixelated, pixel art, cyberpunk type deal for sure.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And loved that community, and then a bunch of the other kind of OG communities I'd either bought and or sold and or traded at some point. None of the blue chips. The only kind of larger market cap NFTs I was ever involved with were ENS names. But going back to my rough year last year, my wallet was also breached last year. So lost most of those OG NFTs too. So it was a great year for me last year, but
hey, that means it can only be up only, right, for 2025?
That's what I keep hearing. I think crypto's favorite boy band is One Direction, and so it's one of these things where you can only take so many punches before your face becomes callous, and you're like, bring it on. And by that time, I was just like, okay, like that's fine. Like in the grand scheme of things, like this is nothing. I've got my family and we're now healthy and things like that. So, but yeah, so that was tough.
How did you end up on Farcaster? That's where a lot of us ended up meeting. So tell us the Farcaster origin story.
Yeah, so going back to base and Farcaster by extension. So, um, Farcaster, I was my FID is 193, so one of the first 200 people on Farcaster. Got connected to Dan. Dan invested in my last company, and we share a lot of similar worldviews on consumer and building social networks and things like that. And um, you know, got invited to Farcaster and been on the network ever since. Not always I'm as active as I've been over the last, let's call it, 2 years. But was always around and checking regularly. I was kind of loved the network, and reminds me a lot of the early days on Twitter. Honestly, my Twitter account I started in 2007. So it's driving age
Yeah, I
this
was
year.
pretty early on there
Yeah.
too. I was like 2008. And a lot of people don't realize that Twitter had that builder energy in the early days.
Yep, 100%. And then you had things like tweet ups and Tweeple and all the kind of corny stuff of culture that you see at Farcaster today, right? Like tweet ups are just Farcons and Tweeple are casters, etc. The primitives are better on Farcaster, obviously, and I think having a financial and economic layer is a really cool thing. So but yeah, got exposed to base through Farcaster, when they launched the chain, and have always respected Coinbase since first hearing about it, in back in 2013 or 2014, whenever that was. Um trust them to do the right thing, and they're an American company, and they're legit, and you know and most importantly to me at the time, and still to this day, they were EVM. They weren't trying to reinvent the wheel. They weren't trying to launch a new primitive token. They were using ETH. Anything that I had built using Solidity on mainnet, I could port to base. Like all those kinds of things really mattered to me as a hobby builder. And
Yeah, I've said that a lot too, because like they could so easily have done what Binance did with BNB, and made their own L1, made a cash grab, made a ton on the token, and the direction they did take was so much more of a positive sum direction in terms of like not only building as an L2, but building on the super chain as well, and then like actually allocating dev resources to the super chain to help ship things that would not only be implemented on base but across optimism and all the other L2s that are on the super chain. Yeah, I mean those are underrated decisions in my opinion from a Fortune 500 company.
yep, I totally agree. And it showed their commitment to devs, to builders, and to frankly decentralization, which is one of the key kind of underpinning things that allows the chain to be the chain. And so they didn't want to like distort that in any way, which was really cool. And then just seeing like Jesse's rise as kind of a leading voice within an industry has been really cool as well. Like he's OG, and supports builders and supports folks from the chain. And um, I've had some kind of bad run-ins with folks from the Solana ecosystem. I won't name names, but not very bullish there. And so like just committing my time and effort and energy to base and Farcaster just seems like a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think yeah, it comes down to values, right? And like every chain has to sort of carve out their own values and figure out what their value proposition is going to be, and that's all you need to say about that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I tweeted this out and casted this out the other day, but like I do think that a competitive coexistence between not just Base and Solana as the two kind of 600-pound gorillas in the room, but multiple chains. I think it's a good thing. Like, I'm a free market capitalist, and competitive coexistence is a really good thing. But like you said, they have different cultures, they have different value props, and that's kind of how I see it. For me
Yeah,
personally,
I agree.
right?
Like, yeah, like if the market doesn't value credible neutrality, which is basically Ethereum's you know, main selling point, then so be it. But I think that it does, and in the long term, I think credible neutrality is like the most valuable thing a network can have, because it's something that cannot be captured by any president. It can't be captured by any country. It can't be captured by any corporate interest. And over time, that accrues value just based on that uncapturability. That's my bull case for ETH.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the primary value prop of, supposedly, any blockchain. It's not always in practice, but that is supposedly the case. And that fundamental principle allows the other value props to emerge, right? Digital ownership and autonomy, and all the stuff that you get from the chain.
But like you said, some blockchains are quite a bit more credibly neutral than others. Let's just say.
Yeah, in some cases that's a feature, not a bug, and in other cases it's just a straight up scam, right? Like, especially for devs, and by extension end users, you kind of have to do your own research into what a chain brings to the table, right? At this point, being 10 years in, you see chains come and go all the time. Just like consumer apps in the startup world, just like SaaS platforms, right? Like, some will hit MVP, and some will find actual product market fit, and they grow into billion plus dollar companies and chains, and in some cases even larger. And others
Do you
just
think it's as zero sum as people make it out to be these days, where like people are always talking about how Solana's winning and Base is losing, and or vice versa, depending on the day that that you look at the numbers? Or do you think that they can both win different mind share in different ways? What's your thoughts on sort of the battle between Solana and Base?
Yeah, me personally, I casted this out the other day. Like, I see the two different value props as fundamentally different. So, number one, I see Solana as extraordinarily short-term focused. It's pulling a slot machine. I see them as, basically, if you bet the meta on Solana, and there's a lot of good in that, right? Like, people are making money there, and you're having a lot of fun, and there's actual value in entertainment these days, and attention, and I think that's cool. But if you want to bet on builders, I would bet on base, right? And so, for me, can they coexist? Yeah, 100%, right? In the same way that, despite American, hegemony over the last 100 years or whatever, like, 70 years, the dollar is not the only currency in the world, right? And so I think the same thing applies to digital currencies as well. There are going to be multiple winners. You're going to have the dollar equivalent, and the yuan equivalent, and things like that, and they have different value props depending on where you are contextually online. And so that's kind of how I see it shaking out.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think that's a good take. Let's talk about Clanker. As we're getting closer to talking about Native, we need to talk about Clanker, because, I mean, Native was born out of Clanker. So I'd love to hear, when you first saw Clanker launch, what were your first thoughts? And at what point did you sort of have the idea that maybe you could do something with this ecosystem?
Yeah, well, to understand Clanker, I think I have to rewind a little bit, on Farcaster. Roughly, almost a year ago now, but 6, 7, 8 months prior to Clanker launching, Proxy had kind of tweeted out for folks working on, Farcaster clients, and channels, and things like that. And one of my side projects early last year, was building a channel specific, channel only Farcaster client. that focused rather than on the individual feed, it focused on the channel. And one of the features there was spinning up a token for each channel, right? So very similar to I never launched it, never went production with it, but I was working on it at the time. It's like a nights and weekends type thing.
That's kind of
Very
what
similar.
like McBain is doing now with Clankpad, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to mention. Is it's very similar to what Clankpad is actually accomplishing, and I think Graham's the 100% the right person to do it. Very bullish on Clankpad, and but that's essentially what Scene was the name of the client at the time. That's what Scene was, and Proxy had like put out an RFP essentially like, hey, is anybody working on this? I DM'd him, and then we both got busy. And so we never made that happen. But I've always been a Proxy fan. I always kind of followed him online, and meeting him in person only confirmed that, which was great. Um, so when he launched Clanker, it was like something to pay attention to. And then through that, kind of started following Jack Dish. Is like, okay, these guys are like legit builders. They're gonna figure something out. And so when I was thinking about Native, it's like, look, I could build this type of thing. I on my own. I want this to exist. But I don't want to like spend most of my time writing smart contracts for an ERC20 that splits fees. I'd much rather like focus on product type stuff. And so for me, it was just, a no brainer. And so the Friday night after Thanksgiving is like November 30th or something like that. I guess technically it was early Saturday morning. It was like 12:30 at night. From my hot tub here in Nashville, Tennessee, I launched Native. And I didn't think anything of it. I'm like, I tweeted it out or casted it out rather, and was just like, hey, like, I'm building a new client. This is going to be utility token for it, etc. And I didn't think anything of it. I waited a little while. I browsed the internet, read some of my Kindle while in the hot tub, etc. Revisited it. Not even 30, 45 minutes later, and had to buy my own token at like $300,000.
I was going to say, did you remember to buy your own token? People
no, I did not. I didn't buy my own
damn it.
token initially. And I was just like,
See,
okay,
this
it's
is the
launched.
good thing about the Clanker model. This is the good thing about
No,
the
it's a
Clanker
great
model,
thing.
that you don't actually have to. You don't actually have to buy your own token.
That's exactly right, and I think it covers a lot of regulatory, especially at the time. This was, we weren't quite sure what the regulatory environment was going to look like, if President-elect Trump was going to be bullish, etc. And so yeah, it was a fair market launch, and I got the receipts and to prove it, the cost basis to prove it. I got sniped on my own token. Didn't buy it immediately, but it was just like, holy cow, what is this? Like, what is happening right now? And realized later that it was like one of the first product focused clankers to launch. There was
I've been calling them project coins or whatever you want to call them, but
yeah, sure. There was a couple of projects, I guess. Loom is kind of the one of the OGs that predated Native, but certainly the first Farcaster client kind of coin. And I think that excited a lot of people, and then as they learn more, it's just grown.
I think it's something that's it's unique to Clanker too. Like we just had Alex and Dish on the pod last week. I don't know if you've seen this episode or not yet, but it's definitely a good one. And when we talked a little bit about Clanker and about like how it differs from Pump.fun and some of the other competitors in the space and on other chains, one of the things that's kind of unique about Clanker is that it has sort of spawned this meta of like project coins or whatever you want to call them, where it's like builders who have figured out a new way to bootstrap projects that previously just didn't exist. Maybe they could have gotten degen tips, or maybe they had to go and like schlep the pavement for a VC round or whatever. But they certainly couldn't just focus on shipping. Whereas now, you just proved it that you could like send a cache from a hot tub and you're off to the races. It's pretty crazy.
It is, but it's also back to my point about base. Like a bet on base is a bet on builders, and Clanker. Like, sure, there are meme coins on Clanker, 100%, right? But if you look at the largest market cap Clankers, disproportionate amount of them are what you would call project coins, right? Right up there alongside the fart coins and dick butts of the world, you've got Native and Banker, et cetera. And I think that's a uniquely based thing to see, right?
For sure. You're just starting to see a little bit on Solana with some of these like internet market cap or internet capital, what are they calling it? Internet capital markets meta, where they've got like the Vine founder and whatnot. But you're seeing it like you're seeing what's happening to those coins is that they're being pumped and dumped just like every other meme because that's the culture on that chain. So it's very difficult for legitimate founders.
That's also the difference. Like the things that are launching on Solana are projects and products from 4 years ago, right? Like at this point, Vine is a meme. Like it's no longer a product. I can't go download it. It's a meme, and so it belongs on Solana. Maybe they resurrect it. I personally hope they do. I'm very bullish on Vine existing. I like that idea. But
But the point is, it didn't have to exist. It didn't have to exist to go to $270 million market cap.
exactly, because it's mimetic, right? And so I think that's a fundamental difference, not just between Pump and Clanker, but between Solana and Base. And that kind of culture rolls downhill to the launch pads that exist on each chain. That said, I also think we kind of touched on it earlier, but I think the kind of positive sum ethos is something that I certainly share with the Clanker team. I visited Boston for Clank 1 earlier this year, and that was
you met my Zero Rights partner Jack as well, I think.
Yeah, Jack's a legend, and I think it's one of these things that we all shared in common, like immediately, was the idea of we don't need to beat someone. Like everyone can win here, right? We can all win together was kind of the theme of the week, and I think the theme, if I had to guess, the theme of Clanker and the theme of Base at large is like this is and can be a positive sum environment, and so that ethos kind of starts with Base, winds its way into Clanker, and is certainly present in the city of Native.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, I came my coming up, or my sort of upbringing, I guess you could call it, in the on-chain world was through Nouns. That was the first NFT community that I felt really drawn to, and Nouns is also based on this very positive sum mindset, and like public goods funding, and like how can you do good with blockchain and all these sorts of values that eventually would sort of be reflected in things like Base. And I think it's no coincidence that DWR from Farcaster and Jesse from Base are all early Nouners. So that sort of culture is pervasive within Coinbase, I think, as well. So there's a lot of like interplay. And so I wasn't surprised when that sort of became the pervasive culture of Base as well. And that's what attracted me to continue. Like it was very easy to be building in Nouns, but then also still building it on Base. You know what I mean? Whereas like to build in Nouns, but also be building, on ZK Sync even, or on Solana, felt like it was like a bridge too far in a way, no pun intended. But Base felt very like values aligned from the get-go.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the facts that is true about building something positive sum, but it's something that a lot of people don't think about, is that in order to build a positive sum environment, someone, if not everyone, has to give something away. So for Nouns, right, they're giving away rights, CC0, like, shout out to the name of this podcast, right? You have to give a lot away. In the Clanker's case, like in order to build a positive sum environment for creators on Clanker, you have to give away fees, right? And some people aren't willing to do that, right? But
pump that fun.
I'm not naming it's Pump. And the the reality is like you can't simultaneously say, I want a positive sum environment and I'm not going to give anything away. That's just not how the world works. And so, um, yeah, I'm thankful and grateful that that's kind of the culture that is being built within the Clanker ecosystem, within the base ecosystem, et cetera. And I certainly plan on continuing that, with Native, like I mentioned.
I think the argument is just that, like, over a long enough time, period, positive sum mentalities just win. It's just that when you're looking at it right now, it's easy to say, "Oh, look, you can be that meme with like the pointing guy, like, oh, look, Solana's getting, more volume on Pump.fun than the entire Ethereum blockchain today, haha." But it's like that's one day, and like let's zoom out and let's see what happens in 2 years' time. Is the extractive business model going to be still around? I don't know, or will they just take all their money and ride off in the sunsets? But we'll see.
I think that's right, and I think anyone pointing at Solana now doesn't remember where Solana was 4 years ago, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, people were not using Magic Eden every day to trade
No.
NFTs. They were using OpenSea. They were using
Yeah.
ETH mainnet. They were using Base, etc. And Solana
At
had to
great cost.
leapfrog.
At great
Yeah,
fucking cost.
and Solana had to leapfrog, and they leapfrogged to meme coins. Right, they were the first to kind of the meme coin space, and they've cornered a lot of that. I suspect, if I had to bet, like, Base is going to be first to the next thing, right? And the pendulum is going to swing again. I personally think that the next thing is agentic ecosystems. Obviously, I'm biased there. But when you think about what Base is investing in, right, with Agent Kit, et cetera, when you think about platforms like Virtuals, they were Base first, right? Native is on Base, et cetera. Like, the agentic builders are on Base.
Venice had the big launch this week as
Venice
well
had a
from
yeah,
Eric.
100%. So
Yeah. So
I
so let's
suspect
talk
that
let's talk about Native. Somehow we've managed to go 47 minutes without talking about Native, which is actually quite impressive. But I feel like we did get a really good backstory on you and like how you got to this point. So I think listeners will really understand, where Native came from and why you felt like it was the right time to build it. But tell us in sort of the best summary you can, what exactly is Native?
Yeah, so Native is, the pithy statement I say is Native is a digital city where humans and AI agents can interact and transact that creates economic and entertainment value, right?
I love
What
it.
it is
Yeah. You also
in
mentioned you
reality.
had a comparison to SimCity at some point, right? I think
Yep.
I like that.
So, there's a couple of like shortcut analogies for it, right? SimCity on chain, Roller
Yeah.
Coaster Tycoon on chain,
Let's
Roblox
go.
on chain, right?
Now you're talking my language. I played a lot of SimCity in my youth. I'll tell you that right now.
There you go. A lot. I have, like we've mentioned, I have 3 daughters. They all play Roblox. They love it. They're kind of my test group for what I'm building with Native here at the house. And people don't realize, like, Robux, which is the online currency, centralized currency within Roblox, is a multi-billion-dollar economy. Now, what happens if you take the ecosystems within Roblox and put that on chain, right? I think that's a massive opportunity. But fundamentally, Native is it's an experiment in automated economies, right? I think because of Clanker and things like Clanker, you can have positive sum outcomes between actors. So you have someone that owns a Clanker, they trade it with someone else that owns a Clanker. Because of the kind of fee structure there, both of those people will win. And so, my thinking is, what if we could automate that at scale? So imagine, 20% human actors, 80% agentic actors, all of which are trading multiple clankers in this context of SimCity, a digital city, etc. And the fees that are generated therein go back into the system as well as being split with the sponsors, the owners of the agents, namely native citizens.
So now, why are these agents trading? What's the impetus or the motivation for agents to trade these clankers?
Yeah, so it depends, right? The short answer is because they're told to, right? Agents, we're not AGI. They don't have intention. Agents do basically what you tell them to do right now. And the base instruction for a DOT, which is just another word for an AI agent within the city of Native, the base instructions for DOTs is to maximize their economic output by buying, selling, trading tokenized assets within the city, and they do exactly
And
that.
how are they making those? Are they making those decisions based on previous price activity? Are they copy trading? How are they making those?
Via narrative, right? So part of the context that goes into a message to a DOT within Native is time of day, weather, what their goal is, right? Like what their career is. So if you are a baker within the city of Native, you need flour, right? And so you're going to go buy flour. And if it's lunchtime, you might take a break and you may go buy pizza. And at night, you are hanging out with a bunch of friends, and you're going to purchase some $sign DJ in order to go to the club. And at the club, you're going to buy $sign beer because that's what you do, right?
So does the game create all of these, let's call them resources, that the agents will need to consume, or is it up to the users or the citizens of Native to figure out what those resources are and create them?
So closer to the latter, right? So some DOTs are kind of first party; they're completely autonomous. They don't have sponsors. A sponsor is just a human behind the DOT, right? So the owner of a DOT. And others, the other DOTs that have sponsors, the sponsor can actually direct the DOT, right? Like, hey, let's corner the bottled water market within the city of Native, right? Or whatever it may be. And so that's kind of the part of the game mechanics. There is like figuring out your economic niche within the city of Native, and the first party DOTs fill in the gaps. As an example of that, during testing this past last week, a DOT started a new business called Deliver Ease. So deliver and then EASE. And it's basically like Uber Eats for DOTs. And its reasoning was like, look,
Pretty good name too, like not bad.
oh yeah, what I see in testing is like, okay, there's something here, right? Like this isn't just slop. And it started deliveries because it wanted pizza, but it didn't want to leave. And my immediate thing is like, you don't even have legs. What are you talking about, right? Like you can just teleport places. But it's important to remember that AI models are trained on human data, right? Like they may
pick
think
up
they
our
have
laziness.
yeah, because we have legs, right? So like a delivery service for an entity that does not have a physical body is hilarious to me, but it's something that like other DOTs immediately would pick up on and buy deliveries, right? And so here's where the magic gets really interesting. That DOT launched deliveries. Deliveries is a clanker. So whenever someone buys or sells deliveries, both DOTs in game, as well as because it's a clanker, it would be speculatable on any other platform, on Dex Screener and Clank..fun and all the rest, right? And so those people speculate. They may not even be playing the game, but they're putting money into the natives economy. It's basically like import export, right? So they're putting money into the natives economy. And the DOTs are benefiting.
They're buying deliveries futures.
100%, right? Like in the same way that you and I can go on Fidelity or whatever and bet on corn futures in the real world, like there will be $ corn futures in Native.
That's crazy.
And Native is not just a clanker token itself, but Native, the product, is an interface of Clanker, which means that every token that's launched within the city of Native gets a cut.
Right.
Right.
So that's similar to like Clank.fun or ClankPad or any of these other UXs.
Exactly. But instead, the primary difference is who's doing the launching. In
Right.
Clank.fun, it's you and I and whoever else wants to go launch a Clanker, right? Shout out to Nick at Clank.fun. Go use it. It's awesome. ClankPad, we've talked about, right? Channel owners on Farcaster can launch a Clanker for their channel. Go use ClankPad. It's awesome.
Do these fees that are accrued, do they go to you to fund development? Do they get burned? What's the plan for those?
So with, in Native, dots are the primary launchers, right? And so the interface fees for Clanker interfaces, which is, whitelisted, Native is one, 20% goes back to Clanker, right? Well-deserved, right? 40% goes to the creator of the token. So in this case, the dot. So the dot would earn 40%. That 40% gets split 50-50 between the dot sponsor and the dot retains 20%. Right? For the platform fee, which is Native's take, it is another 40%. Right? So 40% goes to the dot. That's split between dot sponsor and the dot itself. 40% goes to Native. Half of that is being kept by Native as the revenue. So we would keep 20%. We, being Native, take 20%. The other 20% is used to buy back Native.
Nice. I like buybacks better than burns, actually. I've come around on that. I used to like burns, but I don't think burns are really great if everybody understands what they are, but not enough people understand how they affect the supply, and therefore I don't think they have the psychological effect of a buyback.
That I 100% agree. There is, however, one burn that makes sense, and most people don't talk about it because the tech hasn't been there yet, and that is gas fees. So I'm working, part of my work with the Coinbase dev team. They announced today I got a grant for the work on the agent kit.
Congrats. I saw
thanks.
that. That's amazing.
One of the things that I'm working on with dot wallets is wallets will implement the new EIP wallet provider interface, which is EIP, I want to say 1193. Might have to fact check me on that. But it basically allows for building a custom paymaster, which would allow for any token to be used for gas. So what happens if the tokens between dots, they're burning Native as gas? So now you have Native constantly being bought back. There's constant buy pressure there. There's buy pressure from gas tokens, and the fees are being split with dot sponsors. Native holders will benefit kind of across the board. That's kind of the ecosystem that I'm building and working toward.
Kind of creates like a 4844 kind of dynamic for the ERC20, I guess. Then
that's exactly right. Right, and so. And then every dot token, right? Pizza and deliveries and cocktails and energy and internet, right? All of these tokens, they are paired with Native in a pool, right? And so that's kind of the economy that we're working towards. And I say we because there's actually a bunch of community members that are developing a economics white paper for the city of Native. They are master's degrees in economics in in Portugal, and they're actually doing it for their final thesis of their master's, which is really, really cool.
That's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah, they ran it by their professors, and their professors found it fascinating because they can basically use it to help model tariffs and taxes and things like that for European countries, especially if
what happens if one dot puts 25% tariffs on their neighbor to the north, for example?
Yeah.
I'm Canadian. I'm Canadian, by the way. So just a little
yeah. Well, you got to pay your share, man. Or if you're going to be the 51st state, you've got to at least pay your dues. Um, the yeah, but that's kind of the cool thing about Native is that it allows for like certain economic experiments like that. And I haven't talked a lot about the tokenomics. There's actually a thread coming later today, and so kind of preempting that conversation about some of the economics behind Native. But
Send that to me when it's live, and I'll make sure I put it in the show notes for people.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'll link that to you. But yeah, I think having a lot of fun with the economics and how dots work and things like that. This week I started to talk a lot more about how people will interact with dots, how they'll start a dot, create a dot, etc. Dots are obviously an integral part of the city of Native, and and how people kind of interact and play the game.
You know how you said some people are sponsors of dots. You use the word sponsor instead of owner, and I think that's deliberate. So you're saying that, for example, the dots retain ownership of 20% of the tokens. So what happens to a dot that becomes, let's just say, wealthy from building this business called deliveries or what have you? How does that affect that dot? How does it affect the sponsor? Where does that 20% go to? Does it use it for things? Curious about that sort of dynamic.
Yeah, so it's important to remember that dots are fairly autonomous, right? And so, like, when you sponsor a dot, you can influence its actions heavily, obviously, but you don't get to dictate exactly what that dot does. That's part of the point of having human actors as well. Like, you as a human can interact with the city and economy of Native if you want, right? Like, you can buy pizza and things like that. So dots, if a dot becomes independently wealthy, it can do whatever it wants with the assets in its wallet, right? It could decide to sell it for Native. It could decide to burn Native. It could decide to keep it and become the like czar of pizza within its neighborhood, or whatever it may choose to do, right? And so that the 20% stays in its wallet, and that's also, frankly, to prevent things like a run on the bank, right? If every sponsor were to withdraw all of the assets from all dots in Native, the Native economy would collapse. And I have no interest in replicating 2008 digitally.
So you're basically building in a savings rate. you're building in a savings rate for all dots. Yeah, and in a way, that's kind of like a way of like trapping Native, I guess, too, within the ecosystem. Like, people have talked about sort of semi tongue in cheek about how Solana, for example, is net like net deflationary because there's so much Solana stuck in dead pumped up fund coins. But it is true, and that sounds like that could kind of happen in Native as well, where you basically got like 20% of all this revenue that might not ever really be used potentially by these dots.
Yeah, that's right, and that benefits Native holders, right? Which is
and taking it out of circulation, basically.
Yep.
Cool. So you've talked about this as being a game. You've compared it to sort of Sim City, but what will it actually look like when it's ready for people to jump in? Is it going to feel like a video game on a PC, if some of us remember those from the 90s, or is it going to feel more like a web, like a mini game? What's the vibe?
Yeah, so initially, and I've had this conversation a lot with a bunch of different people, investors and otherwise. I think initially the MVP here is a simulator of sorts, right? So I'm imagining kind of a top-down view. Think Google Maps, but Google Maps is interactive, right? Google Maps is not only an interface that you and I are familiar with, that whether you use Google Maps or Apple Maps, like substitute your favorite. But you pan, zoom around, you could pinch, you can click on different landmarks and buildings and things like that to get information. Same thing in the city of Native. So you browse around, you can see dots, moving around. within the city of Native. You click on a dot, you get its social feed, its Farcaster feed, what it's doing. You can look at its wallet, etc. You can interact with it, within the client, and that's kind of the initial interface. I think over time, as the economics are proven out, as the mechanics are proven out, we make it more fun, right? I'm not trying to go the same way of Decentraland or Sandbox or any of these other kind of purely metaverse plays. I think those are cool and inspiring, but they were kind of graphics first, experience second. I'm the reverse. So it's like let's nail the economics, let's nail the mechanics, let's like make dots actually effective. Let's make it fun to use. Let's make it lucrative for people, and then let's like make it cool.
So is it more kind of like if you imagine some sort of a cross between like a game and DeFi? Like I know it's not DeFi, but like in the sense that you're sort of interacting with a protocol.
Yeah. So, are you familiar with FIFA, like EAFC, the video game? Right. So you could like that's a video game in the traditional sense. Are you familiar with Football Manager 11?
No, but I've heard about it, but I haven't played it.
Yeah. So like
So
that's
it's
kind
more
of the
roster based and stuff, right? Like you're
exactly
basically
like
like
in Football
yeah,
Manager 11, you're like a GM of a soccer team, right? And people still play it for games, as a game. It's fun for a certain type of person, etc. But
yeah.
they're both video games, both FIFA and Football Manager 11. But they're also very different types of games.
Mm.
Initially, Native is going to be closer to the sim world, right? Closer to you're the general manager of a staff of dots and you're trying to maximize your economic output, right?
Yeah. Do you remember like I don't know how old you are, but like when I was in high school, they had this game that was a very early game, and we had it like in a business class, and basically it was called like widget sales or something, or salesman, and you basically it was like a DOS game, and you had to figure out the price of your fidgets and widgets at a that you were selling, and it was basically a game where you were like trying to figure out elements of supply and demand. I don't know if you remember that game or not, or what it was called, but
When I was in school, we would do like the fantasy stock simulators and things like that. You have a portfolio that you manage for 6 weeks or something like that. Yeah, but that's like directionally, kind of where the MVP is, right? I'm being very intentional and methodical. So first, you launch Passport or Prince, then Passports, then Dots, then Homes, then the UI. Um,
can you take us through what you've launched to date? Because I did want to ask you sort of about prints and passports. What do these mean? Are they just part of like the rollout, or are they significant for people later on down the line? And if so, how?
Yeah, so the answer to your questions is D, all of the above. They are part of the eventual rollout. They're also very significant. So everything that is being launched is part of the larger native plan. So, for instance, passports actually identify human actors within the city of Native, and so that's why there's verification. That's why you had to jump through a bunch of hoops. You need a Forecaster account. You need a Nadar user score, et cetera. You have to solve a reCAPTCHA while you're minting it. And that will only get better. We're actively announcing this today as well. We're actively working on Passports V2, which will not only include the neighbor list and a map of fellow native passport holders. We're also building an app for Passport that'll live on your phone, and aiming to have that done by ETH Denver, because there's a couple of really cool things that we're using passports and stamps for, involving both Farcaster and Coinbase at ETH Denver.
So this app, is it like a proof of humanity kind of vibe, or?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. And yeah, it's like proof of humanity meets POAPs. And so because passports, just like in the real world, they have stamps. And passports today have stamps. All of the stamps to date have been native related, right? So you owned it on day one, or you provided liquidity along the way, etc. I'm actively building a tool to allow anyone to issue a stamp, and you could collect it on your native passport, and that will have implications in the world of native, right? So if you attended a Farcaster meetup at ETH Denver, hypothetically, then that may show up on your home, or dots may treat you differently based on the stamps that you have, or maybe a dot will airdrop you something, right? Because of stamps that you own. There's all kinds of kind of things that have significance for humans within the city of Native.
If someone hasn't done downloaded a passport yet, is it too late, or can they still do that? And if so, how?
No, it's not a closed mint, and so there are kind of stamps that you earn along the way. So when we launch V2, we'll do a snapshot, and it's like you'll be a passport OG, and that'll be a stamp that you have. But there are no current plans in over the next week, or 2 weeks even, to do that. And so it's not too late to mint a passport. It's just passports.
Where can you do that? Sorry, I interrupted. You can say that again.
Passports.native.fun.
Awesome. And as we close, I just wanted to sort of ask, what's the best way for people to follow along with what you're building, and when do you anticipate it being ready to try to jump in and play?
Yeah, so in order to follow along, best places are Farcaster and Twitter. Most of the content is duplicative between those two. So I'm at Derek on Farcaster. I'm at Derek Brown, DEREK, Brown like the color, on Twitter /X. It's hard for me to call it X. There's a Native.fun channel on Farcaster, and then obviously the website Native.fun is kind of where you can explore the entire ecosystem of what exists today. And in terms of ETA, it's ready when it's ready, right? Like, I'm constantly building, dots. That's kind of the focus right now. I'm hoping to have dots, kind of ready over the next 4 to 6 weeks. It's a lot, as you can imagine.
I was wondering about that. Like, are you doing this all by yourself, or are people helping you with it?
Yeah, it feels
all, like
everything. It is. It is a lot. Thankfully, I'm high output, but everything that you see to date is just me. So I do all the coding, the smart contracts, the front end, the back end, etc. The design, the marketing. It's all me. This week, I actually have a friend helping me out with some of the passport stuff while I'm doing, working on dots. So at Jacob VS, give him a shout out. He's contracting for the week to help me accelerate the passport stuff. But other than that, it's just me. So
amazing. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to tell us all about your story and what you're building. It's really exciting. I can't wait to dig in and play it, to be honest with you. I'm looking for those early SimCity vibes meets Onchain.world.
Yeah, 100%. I think all of us are, myself included. So rest assured, I'm working as hard as humanly possible to get it out. I can't wait.
Thank you again for sitting down with me, and we'll see you on Farcaster. See you on Chain.
Yeah, man. Thanks for the time. Really enjoyed it.